just need to do a sound check. All right. Okay, we're good. All right.
Okay, we're good. All right, okay, we're good.
All right. Heavenly Father, we give you all the praise, the glory, and the honor. And we want to thank you for bringing us here today to study your word. Um, Father, as always, I pray that this lesson is edifying and that we learn more about who the Israelites are and what was your purpose for the Israelites. Why are they so significant? I mean, even now, why are the Israelites so significant? Why is it so significant about who the Israelites are? And how do they fit into your purpose? How do they fit into our purpose? And so these are the questions that we have, Heavenly Father. And I pray that we're able to the best of our ability, come to get some answers through your word. We thank you, and this is in your Son, Yeshua, HaMashiach, Jesus Christ. We pray, amen. All right. So, um, so today we're talking about Satan's playbook, mirroring ancient Egyptian tactics in modern politics. So again, this is called Satan's playbook and mirroring ancient Egyptian tactics in modern politics. So when we dive into biblical history, when we dive into biblical history, we've seen that the names, the people, and the places that they're not just labels, but they are loaded with meaning. They're loaded with geography and prophecy. And so, for instance, you take the word Mitzrayim, which is in Hebrew, which is the Hebrew name for Egypt. In the biblical narrative, this land was named after its forefather Mitzrayim, who was the second eldest son of Ham and the grandson of Noah. Now, the story of this family line carries a distinct theme of heat and geography. So in Hebrew, the name Ham, which was the father of Mitzrayim, it means hot. Okay, and so this aligns perfectly with the ancient book of Jubilees, which notes that Ham was allotted the southern dry, sun-drenched portion of the earth. Ham is famously remembered in Genesis as the son who witnessed the nakedness of his father Noah. Um, his eldest son Cush gave its name to an ancient African civilization located just south of Egypt. So there was two names given to what we call today the continent Africa. The name was either Ethiopia or it was Cush. Now, this name Cush, um, Cush gave its name to an ancient African civilization just south of Egypt, encompassing modern day northern Sudan, southern Egypt, and parts of Ethiopia modernly. So today, interestingly, the word Ethiopia comes from the Greek word altho means to burn and ops mean face. So, because of their intense exposure to the sun in these hot southern lands, the Cushites and Egyptians were historically black. Okay. Now, this is just a brief history. I'm not going to get into this too much. But Ham, the youngest son of Noah. Now, this is according to Zondervan. This is according to the Zondervan Bible Dictionary. Ham, Hebrew, perhaps Hot, the youngest son of Noah, born probably about 96 years before the flood, and one of the 8 persons to live through the flood. He became the progenitor of the dark races. It says not the blacks. Now, one definition says not the Negroes, but the Egyptians, Ethiopians, Libyans, and Canaanites. So, according to Genesis chapter 10, verses 6 through 20, his indecency when his father lay drunk brought a curse on Canaan. According to Genesis chapter 20, Genesis chapter 9, verses 20 through 27. And so it says the descendants of Ham, according to Psalm 78:51, Psalm 105, 23, and Psalm 106:22 says in these passages, Ham is used as another name for Egypt as representing Ham's principal descendants. Ham is also a city of the Zuzites east of the Jordan, according to Genesis chapter 14, verse 5. This is all according to the Zondervan Bible Dictionary. Um, so this brings us to a fascinating clash with modern historical revisionism. For generations, popular culture and mainstream history have frequently depicted ancient Egyptians as white or Mediterranean or even Arabic. However, looking back at the etymology and the biblical lineage, the original Egyptians, they were black. But there is an even deeper, more prophetic layer to the name Mitzrayim. So in Hebrew, names often describe an event while simultaneously acting as a prophecy. So the word Mitzrayim originates from the Semitic root sar, which means narrow, constricted, or under siege. So figuratively, let's see. So figuratively, it translates to a place of confinement, restriction, or distress. So we formally associate the word with historical and voluntary servitude and slavery. So the word root reveals that Mitzrayim is less about a specific geographic border and more about the state of being restrained. So this name Mitzrayim that was given to Mitzrayim, the son of Ham, the word means to be in confinement. It means to be in bondage. But it was the Grecians who renamed it Egypt. And so we'll get into the definition. We'll get into the definition of so Egypt just basically means like great house or great mansion, but this is what the Greeks call it. But originally in the Hebrew, it was known as Mitzrayim, and so Mitzrayim means confinement. It means bondage. It means servitude. That's what it actually means. So when we formally associate the word with historical involuntary servitude and slavery, the root word reveals that Mitzrayim is less about a specific geographic border and more about the state of being restrained. And Mitzrayim is going to be mentioned again, but it's going to be in reference to another place similar to Egypt, another place of bondage. Because in Deuteronomy chapter 29, Yahuwah or Yahweh, God, mentions this to the Israelites again. So this linguistic connection sheds new light on the warnings found in Deuteronomy 28. And so there, Yahweh warns the Israelites through Moses that if they failed to remain faithful, that they would be carried away to Mitzrayim in ships. And When viewed through the lens of its true definition, Mitzrayim wasn't necessarily a return to the physical land of Egypt, but a prophecy of being scattered across the globe into new places of distress, restriction, and bondage. In other words, Yahuwah or Yahweh, God was going he was going to allow the Israelites to be sent to another place of bondage that was basically following the same playbook as the Egyptians. So, if we look at biblical history through a symbolic lens, the story of Exodus is a timeless mirror for human nature in this topology. So, as I mentioned before, Pharaoh represents the adversary Satan, while Israel represents like humanity or the church. So, um, Scripture frequently refers to Israel as God's sheep or as Yahweh's sheep. It's not exactly like it's not exactly a flattering term either. Okay, so not necessarily, not necessarily. It does mean that these are people who Yahweh's felt specifically belonged to him, and that this group of people was going to be used for his specific purpose. And so what his specific purpose was to bring in the Messiah. He was going to bring in the Messiah. Israel was supposed to have been his priest to all of the nations. This was like his original intent for them. But again, being a sheep is not necessarily flattering, because sheep are notoriously gullible. They're easily startled and prone to wandering into danger when they lose focus. Another thing about sheep is that sheep really don't have any they don't have anything to defend themselves. They don't have hardened skin like some reptiles do, and and even some other animals. They don't have the hardened skin. They don't have tusk. They don't have like the horns like a deer or antelope. They don't have that. They don't have like razor sharp fangs. They don't have razor sharp claws. Sheep are helpless, and so they're helpless. Again, they're gullible, and again, sheep are just you know they're you know without a shepherd, it's open game for any type of prey that want to get them. Whether it's wolves, whether it's coyotes, whether it's bears, whatever whatever type of predator is lingering about, like that sheep is a sheep is just helpless to defend itself against anything. And so when the church stops listening, when Israel, because the church, according to Romans chapter 11, the Gentile church is the wild olive branch that is grafted in to the to the natural olive branch, which is Israel. So that's all the church is. Like, I don't know where replacement theology comes from. Replacement theology is that the church, like, I even heard Candace Owens say this. I heard Candace Owens say this. And I've heard a lot of different pastors. There was a pastor that recently interviewed Tucker Carlson, and he basically said that the church replaced Israel as God's chosen people, and that's not true. Romans chapter 11 says that the church had been grafted in. Okay, that they were grafted in, and so it's like you don't have anything to boast about. You don't have anything to boast about being grafted in. Now the Israelites also, they don't have anything to boast in either, because they were saved by grace through faith. So it says by grace you have been saved, not by works. It is a gift of God, lest any man should boast. This is Ephesians chapter 2. So when the church stops listening to the master's voice, it falls into the exact same vulnerability. Think about the Israelites, how they ended up enslaved in Egypt. And the adversary doesn't usually march in with chains. He usually uses lures. And so this is what we get from the Pharaoh of Egypt. The Pharaoh of Egypt, he didn't overpower them and subdue them, because remember, the Pharaoh of Egypt said that it was more of them and that they were mightier than they were. So he says, let us deal with them wisely. He says, let us deal with them wisely, because he knew at the time they couldn't actually overtake them. Do you know, like, as far as we're concerned, our government can't overtake us. I mean, of course, people think that we got the military, we got the police force, but actually, it's more of us than it is them. So the way that they get us, they have to deal with us wisely. As a people, as a whole, they have to deal with us wisely. One of the ways they deal with us wisely is that they divide us. That's one of the ways the government deals with people wisely, is that they divide people. So like, look at today. Look at the political divide, look at the racial divide, the social divide, the economic divide, the educational divide, the religious divide, the sexual divide, all of these different divides that exist. This is how people are able to lure us, are able to get us to do their will and to do their bidding. Pharaoh didn't enslave Israel overnight. Instead, he likely enticed them with the promise of prosperity, high daily wages, and a secure future for their families building Egyptian strongholds. So, according to the book of Jubilees and the book of Jasher, the way Pharaoh was able to get the Israelites to basically agree to being slaves was that it started off was that it's like, okay, I'm hiring Egyptians and I'm hiring Israelites. I'm hiring anyone that's willing to help, but I'm hiring you to help us with building these strongholds that's going to protect us against our enemies. And so it started off, you had Egyptians and Israelites working. Now, according to, I think, the book of Jubilees, the tribe of Levi didn't fall for it, but all of the other tribes did. But basically, Pharaoh was able to lure the Israelites in, and thinking that, you guys are going to be working for me. I'm gonna pay you daily. What's up, Chuck? He says, I'm gonna pay you daily. I'm gonna pay you a daily wage, and you'll have something every day to bring back to your families. And according to the book of Jubilees, according to the book of Jasher, this did work for a time. For a time, the Israelites, as well as the Egyptians, they were working on building these cities. But what the Israelites didn't notice, what they didn't notice until it was too late, was that the Egyptians began to gradually they began to gradually pull themselves out of this project, because again, Pharaoh was like, let's deal with them wisely. Now the Israelites are probably thinking, it's like, so what? I remember, so earlier this week, Charles, it was either Chuck or Daryl, they sent this video where there was a guy who was working at this plant, and so there was an older guy who was just like, hey man, man, they got double time coming up Sunday. Do you want to work double time? And the younger dude was like, man, like, I don't know, man. I don't think I am. So I think I want to spend time with my family. And the older guy was like, so what? You don't want to make none of this money? You don't want you don't want to man. So you don't want to get paid? He said, they just giving this money to you. And he was like, but yeah. He says, but I want to spend time with my family. And of course, you had these older guys. They just looked at it as the company, like if you don't want to take this money, you just being lazy, you're not motivated, and that's probably how the Israelites were looking at the Egyptians. They didn't know that they were just being set up. It's like it's a good explanation too. It's a good explanation as to what happened. That you start off like because of course, if the Egyptians aren't in it, then the Israelites are they're gonna probably be suspicious about it. But because Pharaoh is clearly paranoid and afraid of the Israelites, he probably made this seem like like man, this is an opportunity of a lifetime. And I'm gonna tell you, this is what Satan does to many of us. Satan presents to us, these opportunities of a lifetime. There's a lot of these different Christian celebrities. Um, there, there's there's a lot of there's a lot of different Christian celebrities. They're being offered these opportunities of a lifetime. These offers that they just can't refuse. In the name of the Godfather. But they're given these offers that they just can't refuse. And what happens is that yeah, you've made money. You've become famous, you've become affluent. You have a lot of followers, you have a lot of people that like you. But what does it profit a man to gain the world and lose his soul? It's like now you've become a slave to the system. Now you've become, now you've become Hollywood's prostitute. Now you've become a prostitute for the entertainment industry. And and now you'll do anything for the money and the fame. You'll do anything for it. And this is how Satan gets you. This is how Satan gets us. Like here we are, we get married, we have kids, and we dedicate all of this time, effort, and energy and trying to achieve more and more success. And in trying to achieve this success, it's taking us away from our relationship with the Most High. It's taking us away from the relationship with our wives. It's taking us away from the relationship with our children. And so today you have it where people, they love pursuing the bag more than they want to pursue relationships. Today anybody that's telling you to do different, they're a hater, and you need to cut those people out your life. It's like today we are literally being told to cut people out of our lives if they're not if they're getting in the way of us chasing this bag. I mean, this is so again, if Pharaoh is a type of Satan, this is the exact same way Satan gets us. Give me a second, guys. Like, it's getting hot up here. I ain't turned the fan on. All right, you might hear the fan in the background, but hopefully you guys are okay with it. So let's talk about this modern parallel. Modern parallel, the paradox of political influence. So it's worth taking a moment to reflect on a history that often goes overlooked. So the global transition that occurred when slavery was officially abolished across the nation, across the world, nations that had built their wealth, and power, power and family dynasties on the backs of enslaved people. A specific group, primarily composed of black people, suddenly found themselves in a crisis of their own making. Now, um, once these individuals were no longer legally bound as assets or tools, and let me stop here right quick. So, if I'm asked the question whether or not African Americans, black people, Negroes, or whatever, whether or not they are the Israelites, I would tell you I'm not totally sure at this time. But what I do notice, if you read scripture, if you read scripture, if you tap into the history of the Bible, there are some interesting parallels between Negroes or African Americans, blacks, African descendants of slaves. You will see that there's an interesting parallel between them and the Israelites. Now, there are some people, such as Truth Unedited, such as the brother that We Woke Now. There's quite a few people that are saying that blacks are the Israelites. Right now, I would tell you that me personally, I'm not totally sure at this time. However, what I will say is that if you look at the history, just the brief history of African Americans, just a brief history of American African descendants of slaves. When you look at this history, there is a parallel. I mean, like the similarities are so striking that I mean, it's scary, and it makes one conclude that hey, maybe blacks are, maybe African Americans are, and not just African Americans, but there's people in Puerto Rico, Dominican Republic, Haiti, Cuba, Brazil, like really all over the world, the UK, different parts of Africa as well, all over the world, scattered all over the world. Have you guys ever like looked at the Olympics? You guys ever looked at the Olympics and you seen some of these athletes competing in the Olympics, and they look just like you and me because they were simply people dropped off to on different ships to different parts of the world, and now they've adopted the names. They've adopted the Spanish names. They've adopted the French names. They've adopted the Portuguese names. Man, Anderson Silva looks like Tyrone, you know. But Anderson Silva, they'll say he's Brazilian. No, African. Anderson Silva is a Brazilian. I mean, he's African. He's an African. He's what you call an Afro-Brazilian. There's these boxers, Erislandy Lara. There's these different boxers that's from Cuba. They look just like us because they were once slaves. They were just dropped off at different ships, and they were left at these different places. To work as their ancestors worked as slaves. Working in the sugarcane fields and things like that, working in the tobacco fields. Once these individuals, these slaves, were no longer legally bound as assets or tools, the ruling classes began to view them not as fellow human beings, but as a massive liability. So they feared that this population, because the same thing happened, the same thing repeated itself, and I'm going to prove it to you. I'm going to prove it to you today. They learned that this population, now free, talking about us, talking about anybody that's an African descendant of slaves that's somewhere else around the world, posted an existential threat to the stability of their nations. So to maintain their grip on power, these elites needed a way to justify the continued subjugation and control of this group. So, as far as us is concerned, as far as the Haitians is concerned, as far as the Jamaicans are concerned, as far as the Dominicans are concerned, the Afro Dominicans are concerned, as far as the Afro Brazilians are concerned, as far as those people are concerned, even the blacks in England, even the blacks in the UK, the elites needed a way to justify the continued subjugation and control of this group, especially as they feared the prospect of retaliation and the rapid growth of the black population. Because remember what the we haven't gotten to that yet, but what the Egyptian midwives had to say about the Hebrew women, about how they were when they gave birth. This like you can look at us in athletics, and you can tell that we are not a normal group of people. We are us. We are a special group of people. Now, I mentioned this before. Jimmy the Greek said that one of the what he theorized, one of the reasons why blacks were so great at athletics, was so physically superior to whites and other non-black. I mean, and even the Africans from Africa. So even the Sudanese, even the Ethiopians, and even those. Why are we so genetically superior? What's so special about us? Jimmy the Greek said that it was because of selective breeding by slave masters. That was his theory. But I think that it's because we are a special people. That Yahweh, Yahuwah made us a little bit different from other people because it's more than just the physical talent. But this is where the construct now let me tell you about racism. Let's talk about racism. Some of you guys aren't going to initially agree with this, but bear with me. Please bear with me. This is where the construct of racism was born. Not as a natural state of human affairs, but as a calculated, engineered solution to a political and economic problem. Remember, Pharaoh said, let us deal with them wisely. Let us deal with them wisely. And remember, I said we have the same interesting parallel today with blacks than what the Israelites and the Egyptians had. So it was a strategy designed to manufacture consent among the general public, convincing those who didn't even own slaves to participate in the oppression of black people. Because remember, not all whites owned slaves. Only more like elite whites owned slaves. Not all whites owned slaves. A lot of the whites were just too poor because slaves were so expensive. By painting them as inherently inferior or dangerous, the elites could align themselves with the broader populace, pitting one group against another to keep the former enslaved class from thriving or reproducing. Because what racism essentially is, the whole purpose of racism is to keep a targeted group of people from reproducing. Not only reproducing with whites, because that was one of the fears. One of the fears was that whites was going to get bred out by these blacks because blacks were considered exotic, erotic. And so there was a fear and a threat. There was an existential threat. Now remember this. There's a very similar fear that the Pharaoh of Egypt had. So does a lot of white Europeans have. Racism was based on a fear. It was based on a fear that the white so-called race was going to be bred out. That they were going to be bred out of existence. So by painting them as inherently inferior or dangerous, the elites could align themselves with the broader populace, pitting one group against another to keep the former enslaved class from thriving or reproducing. If you notice that every single initiative that was ever brought into the black community by politicians, by the global elite, the whole purpose was to keep that group of people from reproducing. Now, the system was built upon the foundation of what we now recognize as junk science. We're talking about racism. Racism is based on junk science. So even if you are a black and you are racially prejudiced, your racial prejudice is based on junk science. This junk science, it drew from a cocktail of the late 18th and 19th century theories, including Malthusian ideas about population control. So there was a guy named Thomas Malthus, and Thomas Malthus, he believed that the world, that his particular portion of the world was becoming overly populated, and that the benevolence of the wealthy, or the benevolence of the haves towards the have not, was going to result in there not being enough food for anybody, and that everybody was going to die of starvation. And so Thomas Malthus came up with these principles that, to get rid of what he viewed as the surplus population. So there was the Malthusian population control ideas, but then there was Darwinian concepts of evolution. So, which were twisted to justify the belief that certain races were biologically superior to others. Charles Darwin's book was called by the Origin of Species, or Means of Natural Selection, or the Preservation of the Favored Races in the Struggle for Life. There was this guy named Johann Blumenbach. Blumenbach came up with the idea that there was 5 different classes of races, which he was wrong. But he says that there was the Caucasian, there was the Asian, there was the Indian, Indian. There was the kind of like the kind of like Pacific Islander, really, like Pacific Islander. But then there was the black, there was the Negro. Now there was another guy. I'm trying to think of his name, but he came up with the idea of Nordicism, and the idea of Nordicism was about in 1855. But this idea of Nordicism, while Blumenbach said that there was 5 races, this person said that the Nordics were the most superior, that the Norwegians, blonde-haired, blue-eyed, that they were the most superior. This is where Hitler, in Mein Kampf, Hitler was stated that Norwegians were pure Aryan, and then he said that the Germans were close to pure Aryan, right? But he said that the blacks was almost 100% pure ape, right? Now, and this is why blacks get so offended when people refer to them as monkeys, or when people make some type of monkey reference to a black person. That's the reason why they get so offended by it, because of someone's belief in this junk science that humans evolved from monkeys. Some evolutionists would tell you, like, no, we don't believe that. That's exactly what they believed in. But figures like Julian Huxley. Now, I'm going to tell you how much of an existential threat black people were. Black people are descendants of slaves. They were such an existential threat to the world that figures like Julian Huxley founded UNESCO. And UNESCO and carried the legacy of his grandfather, Thomas Huxley. Thomas Huxley was known as Darwin's bulldog. So the ideas that Charles Darwin had, Thomas Huxley vehemently defended those views of Charles Darwin. Julian Huxley, the grandson of Thomas Huxley, he continued that, and in honor of his grandfather, he came up with UNESCO. Now, and UNESCO deals primarily with population control. Charles Darwin's staunch defender Thomas Huxley were deeply embedded in this intellectual climate. And so to make these ideas stick, the architects of racism had to strip away the spiritual truth that all people are created in the image and likeness of Yahweh. Instead, they replaced it with a web of stereotypes and prejudices designed to override critical thinking. If you notice, any Darwinian, any person that believes in evolution, they lack critical thinking skills. They are not critical thinkers. Because when you think about the theory itself, it doesn't make any sense. And even Charles Darwin said, if you don't find gradualistic forms connecting one species to another, he says, then my theory, you just throw out my theory. Guess what? We haven't found them. But you still have people who believe in Darwinian evolution. Ultimately, this entire framework functions as a method of population control, mirroring the ancient strategy seen in Egypt against the Israelites. It's a system built to manipulate how one group views another, justifying oppressive conditions by claiming that those being mistreated are somehow unfit for society. Because, today, with people like Ben Shapiro and with people like Matt Walsh and so many others, especially, like conservatives, you even got people like Jason Whitlock. You even have people like Officer Brandon Tatum talking about, in the Hodge twins. These people talking about how unfit blacks are for society. Where did they get this from? They got it from these people. So by conditioning the masses, and this is really almost the exact same thing that the Egyptian government did to the Israelites, so that the Egyptian people would be okay with the oppression of the Israelites. And it didn't happen overnight. It took some time. Look at what's happening. Look at what's happening now today, like with black fathers. Look how black fathers are being portrayed in movies. The main group of people in the black community, just like with the Israelites, the main group of people being targeted are the men, are the males. They're the main group. They're the main group that's being targeted. So by conditioning the masses to accept these narratives without questioning them, in other words, discourage critical thinking, the elites secured their status and kept their power intact. As we look at this history, it serves as a powerful reminder of the call to transform our minds rather than conforming to the world's distorted patterns. Romans chapter 12 says, be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewings of your mind. Encouraging us to look past the pseudo-intellectualism of the past and recognize the humanity that binds us all together. It's deeply unsettling to look back at history and realize how much more of the racial hierarchy we're taught was built on the foundation of manufactured fear. Racism was built on a foundation of manufactured fear. People have been convinced, whether through eugenics. Charles Darwin's cousin, Francis Galton, he came up with the idea of eugenics. Eugenics meant good birth, bringing about people, encouraging only the birth of people who were viewed socially fit. So in America, the primary group that was and has always been viewed as socially unfit were blacks, were Negroes. One of the most and so one of the most and so with eugenics, if you look at the eugenics tree, should I pull up? Yeah, let me go ahead and pull up the eugenics tree. I'm gonna pull up the eugenics tree right quick. All right. So if you look right here at the eugenics tree, so eugenics tree has all of these roots at the bottom. So these roots are biology, genetics, psychology, mental testing, uh, geology, anthropology. It says politics, statistics. Statistics, interesting. So the same type of statistics people like Candace Owens and people like Ben Shapiro, people like Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk always used statistics, right? What was so statistics served a purpose in eugenics. What was the purpose of those statistics? The purpose of those statistics was to try to prove to the whole world that through statistics, blacks were socially unfit to reproduce. They were socially unfit for society. Sociology, religion, psychiatry, surgery, medicine, education, economics, biography, law. Law, interesting. Law and statistics. Statistically, what group is the what group populates prisons the most? History. So all of these, listen, Francis Galton said all of those were the roots. These were the roots that fed into the tree of eugenics. And it says eugenics is the self-direction of human evolution. Eugenics is the self-direction of human evolution in the eyes of Francis Galton, in the eyes of those who supported eugenics. And so there's also positive eugenics. And so positive eugenics is putting people in situations where they would have successful childbirths and and they would have successful birth rates. The children are going to grow up healthy and strong, educated, and eventually successful, which could be used as a positive racial stereotype towards a specific group of people. But then you take, but negative eugenics, you put a person in a bad situation where only the worst will come out, so that you can use that as a negative stereotype, so that you can discourage, so that you can discourage their birth rates and discourage their births. They're going to grow up guaranteed to almost guaranteed to fail. They're going to grow up ignorant. They're going to grow up uneducated, so that you can use that against them to show and prove to the world that they're socially unfit. One of the most pervasive myths that took root after the end of slavery was that the idea that the white race was in danger of being bred out. So this wasn't just a casual concern, it was a calculated narrative designed to tap into deeply rooted anxieties about sexual desire and racial purity. This is the reason why, you see with the KKK, the Ku Klux Klan, and when it comes to, like, these white supremacist groups, they have drops of blood on their uniforms or whatever, and it's to encourage the purity of the white race. Ensure that the white race remains pure, that the white race isn't tainted by the blood of anyone else, especially blacks. Because with blacks, you can clearly see the difference when they're born. So by framing the black community as a threat to the very existence of white people, those in power were able to manipulate public opinion, using fear as a tool to secure support for policies that were actually designed for control rather than for protection. People don't recognize this about the government, man. It's never like and these global elites. It's never about your protection. It's about controlling you. Interestingly, I've often thought that this justification was largely a distraction from a direct from a different kind of prejudice. If you look closely at the origins of derogatory terms like redneck, hillbilly, trailer park trash, you start to see that they didn't actually originate as racial slurs. They were insults that white elites used to demean and marginalize poor whites. We didn't come up with Peckerwood. We didn't come up with those. We didn't come up with redneck. They came up with those terms. We didn't come up with poor white trash and trailer trash. We didn't come up with those terms. And even Ebonics didn't come. Like, why are we the face of Ebonics now? Ebonics didn't come from us. We got it from some of the poor whites we were around. They were the ones that had poor grammar. But now, now we're the face. Tell a black person to say ask. Oh, I asked him to come to the store with me. That didn't originally come from us. That came from them. Oh, I ain't going nowhere. You ain't? That didn't come from us. Thomas Sowell said something interesting. He was talking about where the sagging pants came from, where a lot of the fashion, a lot of the slang and all of that, it didn't start with us. It came from whites. But the historical revisionist wants us to forget those things. But I digress. It's a harsh reality that these labels were later co-opted and shifted, but their roots reveal a history of class-based contempt that often gets buried under the broader umbrella of racial conflict. So, when you analyze the various systemic issues that have disproportionately impacted the black community over the decades, it feels less like simple blind racism and more like a deliberate, multifaceted effort to suppress the population. Do you feel as though the population is being suppressed? I certainly do. From the introduction of drugs like crack and fentanyl to gang culture that traps people in cycles of violence while they remain generational renters, to the social agendas evolving feminism and the push for the LGBTQ plus visibility. Think about that. Heroin and marijuana was introduced to the black community following the civil rights movement. It actually was in the black community, but it became increasingly like epidemic and problematic. It became increasingly that following the civil rights movement. So people like Nicky Barnes and Frank Lucas and those others, when it comes to heroin, it made its way in the black community, like following the civil rights movement. And John Ehrlichman, who was the Secretary of Domestic Affairs for the Nixon administration, in a 1999 interview with Rolling Stone magazine, John Ehrlichman admitted that they put marijuana and heroin in the black community so that every time you turn on the news, you'll see a black person getting arrested for heroin. You see that there was some death related to heroin. Fentanyl. Fentanyl made its way into the black community. There was a white reporter. There was a white reporter that that had mentioned how the CIA brought crack cocaine into the black community. And I mean, we don't have ships. We don't control any docks. How did that stuff make its way into the community? Previously, cocaine was only available to rich people. Was only available to celebrities, like entertainers, actors, singers, athletes, and politicians. It was only available to them. But a cheaper form was made, and that cheaper form was brought into the black community. There was these gang wars and turf wars over who's going to control the drug trade, and eventually, this supposedly became an epidemic. There was this war on drugs, and then people like Hillary Clinton, Bill Clinton, goes before Congress, labels our people. We became the faces of the crack epidemic, and and it was determined that our people deserve to be locked up. And then you got this war on drugs and these mandatory minimums, and from this so-called war on drugs, this is where you got this increased amount of young black men being incarcerated, for drugs and nonviolent offenses. And we know that when you go into prison, they're putting you in prison with lifers, and and a lot of people, man, they come out of prison worse than what they were when they came in. So this gang culture that traps people in cycles of violence while they remain generational renters to the social agendas and involving feminism. What's feminism all about? Feminism is this idea that women don't need men, right? It's an idea, and so we're even seeing that today. People like Kevin Samuels, before he passed away. You have people like mediocre tutorials and reviews. You have these people who talk about feminism, and the dangers of modern feminism, what it's done to black women, and how it's hurt the relationships between black women and black men, and then black men's reaction to modern feminism. Now now they find black women undesirable. Now you got these dudes called passport bros. Now they travel abroad to find a more softer, submissive woman, because they feel as though the black woman isn't soft and submissive. They feel that the black woman has become masculine, and that there's this toxic femininity that exists now. With feminism, the black man isn't desirable to the black woman, and because the black woman is the way that she is with her views, that's been indoctrinated in her by some of these white feminists and non-black feminists. Black men now find black women undesirable, and it's crazy that black women are some of the most radical feminists. They're even more radical than the people who taught them. The push for LGBTQ visibility. What's the purpose of all of these? The purpose of all of these, if you are gay, lesbian, transgender, whatever, you're not going to reproduce. You're not going to have any children. You're not going to have any offspring. Your bloodline is cut off. If you are a black woman and your black man doesn't desire you, guess what's going to happen? A couple of things are going to happen. You're going to be good enough to bed or good enough to have sex with, but you're not going to be good enough to wife. So it's going to result in you as a black woman having all of these illegitimate kids. No daddy. You're bitter. You say you don't need no man. You're doing this all by yourself. I could do bad all by myself. But you're ruining your children. For men, making a lot of these men deadbeats. making a lot of these men look like deadbeats. You gonna lay with a woman, and this woman is good enough for you to lay with and have a child with, but you don't want to be there for the woman or the child. This man is good enough for you to lay down with, but you don't want to. You don't actually want to spend the rest of your life with this man. You want to make a life. You want to make a lifelong, life impacting decision with this man, but you don't want to. You don't want to be with this man for the rest of your life. It's crazy. It's crazy. LGBTQ. LGBTQ. If you so-called transition to another sex, guess what? You have made yourself a, a eunuch. You've made yourself a eunuch. Now your sexual organs, they're useless now. You are injecting yourself with these hormones and you're doing these things, making these alterations to your body and dressing a certain way. And you're damaging yourself. You're damaging yourself, and then they want these kids to do this at a young age. They want kids to so-called transition at a young age because once you've made that commitment and you've decided to do this so-called transition, you're getting those hormones and you're getting all these different bodily alterations done. You're gonna be older, and you basically not gonna regret it. But really, the whole purpose for sex, one of the purposes for sex is for reproduction. And now you've made your reproductive organs useless. The whole purpose of this is to stop birth rates. The whole purpose of all of these different movements is to stop birth rates. Where there's any of these things, there seems to be a consistent pattern. Whether it's abortion policies, what's abortion? Abortion is taking the life of an unborn child. So whether it's abortion policies or the social fracturing of the family unit, the outcome is a decline in the community cohesion and population stability. It feels calculated. All of this is calculated. Remember, Pharaoh says, let us deal with them wisely. We've been dealt with wisely. With feminism, the LGBTQIA plus, with all of the we've been with the drug epidemic, we've been dealt with wisely. Gangs, black on black crime, black on black killings, you've been dealt with wisely. Oh, let them kill themselves. Think about how do police interact every time they come in there? They don't care what happens to you. They don't care what happened to you. I remember growing up, there was a kid that I grew up with, and he had three brothers. It was Maurice, Marcus, and Ladarcus. Ladarcus was one of the brothers. Ladarcus got killed, and Ladarcus was probably 14, 15 years old. But the police felt that he was such a menace that they felt that it was that they didn't have to worry about him no more. It was one less person they had to worry about. This kid, someone's baby, got killed, got murdered, and the police didn't even care. They felt relieved. Ultimately, I think that we have to look past the superficial explanations of racism and consider that it's rooted in something much colder. It's an inherent structural hostility towards black existence. It feels like we are witnessing a modern continuation of the same oppressive state-sponsored tactics that were used against the Israelites in Egypt during the time of Moses. You had this persistent strategic attempt to weaken and diminish a people who are seen as a threat to an established power structure. This is how, as black men, when we start showing this to other young black men, maybe it'll change. Maybe it'll change the way they act. See, this is the type of stuff why people like Jamal Bryant is out there, trying to get people to vote a certain way, and while they're out here defending these different groups like the LGBTQIA plus group, while they're out there doing these type of things, these are the type of things that people need to hear. This type of stuff people need to talk about. We see we see the same tragic dynamic playing out in the modern American politics, particularly within the black community. Here's another way how Satan deals with you wisely. During every election cycle, the black vote is treated as the ultimate prize. It's arguably the most decisive force in American politics, vital to the presidential victories of figures across the political spectrum, from Bill Clinton, Barack Obama, Donald Trump, and Joe Biden. Let's go back there. Bill Clinton, how did Bill Clinton win the black vote? Goes on Arsenio Hall, plays the saxophone, gets, and you even had people like Cedric the Entertainer was like Bill, he was saying that the things that Bill Clinton had done during his presidency, cheating on his wife, smoking weed, that it made that Bill Clinton was just like a black person. So that's why Bill Clinton got Cedric the Entertainer's support. Barack Obama. How did Barack Obama had got like over nearly 98% of the black vote? When he it was the largest turnout of black voters in the history of any presidential election when Barack Obama became president. And what about Joe Biden? Joe Biden. There's videos of Joe Biden talking to members of the Congressional Black Caucus where they were expecting a thank you from Joe Biden because it was because of the black vote Joe Biden was able to become president. What did Joe Biden how did he treat the Congressional Black Caucus? Donald Trump, how did Donald Trump get into office? He got into the office through the black vote. Black men decided not to show up for Kamala Harris. Black men got tired of being belittled. They used Barack Obama to belittle him. They used Roland Martin to belittle black men, and it didn't work. Black men got fed up, and because black men didn't show up at the polls, Kamala Harris didn't win the presidency. She got blown out by Donald Trump. This influence extends down to Senate, congressional, and mayoral races. It's not just about voter turnout numbers, it's about passion. The black community brings unmatched energy, vocal advocacy, and cultural influence to the political arena. What did Kamala Harris do with all the money that Kamala Harris was given over $1 billion for her campaign? What did she use a lot of that money on? She used a lot of that money on black figures, people like Beyonce, people like Megan Thee Stallion, people like Roland Martin, people like Oprah Winfrey. She used that money on black figures because they knew that the black vote was vital, that the support of the black. They even said that she was black. They even said that she was black, and some of y'all believe that she was black. They said that her dad was Indian and Jamaican. No, her dad is an Indian who was in Jamaica. Has like a population, I think about 375,000 Indians in Jamaica. Her dad is 100% Indian. So is her mom. She is an Indian. She's not black. The whole thing, like there's Chinese people in Jamaica who calls themselves Jamaican. Jamaica is a country, it's not a people. Come on, man. Yet, despite the backbone of these, yet despite of being the backbone of these political movements, there's a painful double standard. So there's certain politicians and parties simply expect the black vote is just a given, offering very little in the way of tangible returns. This is a reciprocal relationship. If I'm voting for you, I expect for you to do something for me. But whenever blacks tell these politicians that they expect something in return, they'll send these other blacks to attack the black community. Like, how dare you expect something from this, from them? Someone died for your right to vote. You should just go out there and vote. Certain politicians, while other demographic groups openly demand specific policies, resources, or representation in exchange for their support, it is often treated as an insult or a betrayal if black voters dare to demand reciprocal benefits for their loyalty. Without reciprocal accountability, a representative government fails to represent, leaving a highly influential community politically and economically marginalized after the ballots are counted. This is what happens to blacks every election. They have dealt with you wisely. The danger of ignoring the master's voice. History suggests this didn't happen in a vacuum. Just as it was in ancient Egypt, there were likely respected, highly regarded leaders within the community who assured everyone that cooperating with the system was the right move. Anyone who voiced suspicion or warned that the government was setting a trap was probably mocked, dismissed, or labeled a conspiracy theorist. Sound familiar? Ultimately, the lesson remains unchanged. When the sheep stop listening to the master and start trusting the promises of a system designed to exploit them, and that has historically, uh, has historically um, exploited them, they unwittingly walk straight into their own bondage. And this is what we do. Again, we have been dealt with wisely, just like the Israelites. And so I'm using our history today to paint a picture of what the Israelites possibly experienced through the Egyptian government. I think that's going to be it for today. We're gonna continue, and we're gonna talk about some of the other things that possibly caused the Egyptians into going into wanting to use the Israelites as slaves. Hey Chuck, you got anything, bro? You don't have anything, Chuck?
Nah, bro, I got nothing. Just like I
Huh?
said, listen and learning, man. Got
Okay,
nothing, bro. I
good.
appreciate you.
Yeah,
Yes, sir. Shabbat shalom.
yeah. Shabbat shalom. All right, let's go ahead and get out of here. Heavenly Father, we thank you for bringing us together, studying your word once again. Um, I pray that this lesson, I pray that this helps people to understand Um, the Israelites help us understand the church, help us understand the black community. All of these different peoples and all of these different groups where elite powers who influence under the influence of Satan, how they try to exploit us and take advantage of us and get us to just willfully agree to our own enslavement. Um, we thank you for your wisdom. We thank you for your word, and I just pray that this is edifying for everyone. It's in your son Yeshua's name, in Jesus the Christ, Yeshua Hamashiach. Amen. All right, Chuck. Thanks, man, and thank you guys for watching on YouTube. And we'll talk to you guys next week. Peace.
Peace.